2-6.
Are you done with the ruins? Are you guys further in where the farms are? Or are you guys along the canal road, on that canal road?
Break, 2627. We are located, Mike Bravo, 2206, 9842, 2206, 9842, still taking fire. So we were notified of deployment in 2004. We had about 2 or 3 months to get ready. We mobilized in January 2005 and did about 5 or 6 months of train up. We deployed to Iraq. We were going to replace elements of the 10th Mountain Division outside of Baghdad. And so our leadership went out to do our left seat, right seat ride, which is where you go out with the unit you're replacing and they show you the area and you talk about the nuances and the specifics of the area that you're going to patrol, learn the routes, learn the area, start to recognize the people. The day of that first combat patrol was 5 June and the day of 6 June, 2005. So that meant a lot to us. That was when we realized we were going out that night, that the first thing we thought of, it's 5 June. We're going to be on 6 June, our first combat patrol. And we recognized that date in the history of the division, what that date meant. And that's something that you never forget.
June 6th is a holy day for the 29th Division. On June 6th, 1944, the 29th Division landed in the first wave on Omaha Beach during the famous D-Day operation in World War II. But that is not the beginning of their story. Although the division did not exist until 1917, the major units which comprise the division claim a military lineage extending back to colonial times.
The history of the 29th goes back to the founding of this country, the founding of the U.S. Army.
We were born in the Revolutionary War, when the 29th was called the Colonial Militia.
One of the first 6 infantry companies in the United States Army was the company from Frederick, which was originally part of the 115th and now part of the 175th. Michael Cressup, one of the first 6 company commanders in the United States Army.
The Virginia regiments originated in 1741 from colonial militia units, which actually predate the French and Indian War. Past commanders include George Washington and Patrick Henry. 11 companies of Virginians were present at the surrender of the British at Yorktown in 1781. The 175th was formed in 1774 from distinguished Baltimoreans. Later, the regiment fought in the Battle of Long Island in 1776, during which the Maryland 400, as they would later be known, executed a daring bayonet charge to save a major part of Washington's army. In the War of 1812, the 5th Maryland, later the 175th, helped save Baltimore by turning back an invading British army that only recently had burned Washington, D.C. Baltimore's salvation inspired the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner, now the national anthem.
It took a civil war to team up the blue with the gray. And after that, the North and South became one side, the United States.
So they went through the Indian Wars, they went through the Revolution, and then they were a big part of the Civil War and earned their name Stonewall with Thomas J. Jackson at the Battle of First Manassas in 1861. And Jackson always said, "It's not my name, it's theirs." But so it stuck to both Stonewall Jackson as well as the Stonewall Brigade, and they proudly carry that name today, one of the few units that still has a name designation.
New Jersey units fought for the Union, while Maryland units fought on both the Union and Confederate side.
Well, the formation is a critical story. I mean, the fact that you could bring patriots from 2 different causes that not that long ago their fathers were killing each other, to be able to bring them together and serve in a unit. And because of the history, the great history of both those organizations, North and South, They were obviously very proud of their heritage and came together quickly to form such a strong organization. They had a great lineage, and in their blood was the fire of their fathers and grandfathers, and the idea of serving with somebody from the opposite side that may have killed your father was very difficult.
In World War I, our slogan was, 29, let's go. And we went to catch up with the Kaiser.
The 29th Division was born 3 months after America's entry into the Great War as one of 17 National Guard divisions. In summer 1917, units from Maryland, New Jersey, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. poured into Camp McClellan, Alabama. With units drawn from both sides of the Mason-Dixon line, the 29th became known as the Blue and Gray Division and adopted the Korean Yin-Yang as its divisional patch. In 1917, divisions were reorganized to be 25,000 men, including 4 infantry regiments, a transformation that forced consolidation with other outfits. New units emerged, such as the 115th Infantry, a Maryland unit, the 116th from Virginia, and the 113th and 114th, both from New Jersey. Led by General Charles Morton, the 29th Division carried out training at Camp McClellan for 9 months.
Men who fought against each other in the Civil War, sworn enemies, bitter enemies, who faced each other at Gettysburg, who faced each other at Front Royal, who fought each other now together as one common purpose, one common goal, one common unit. And most divisions can't claim that. And just so how the division was formed in the history of the division is unlike any other division in the Army.
The division in World War I was a different organization because it involved units from New Jersey as well as in what's now the District of Columbia and so forth. But they were called together, served at Camp McClellan, Alabama, trained there, went into France, trained, of course, with the French in English in preparation for going into line. They went first into line in July at the Alsace-Lorraine area. They were immediately attacked and tested by the Germans who wanted to see how these guys were from Virginia, Maryland, New Jersey. They held their positions there very well, were later on moved to the Meuse-Argonne, which was the great offensive to end the war. It was Pershing's dream of bringing the end of the war by a huge Allied offensive.
The 29th Division's role in that great drama began on October 8th when it attacked along the Meuse River's east bank against strongly entrenched enemy troops. Maryland's 115th and Virginia's 116th Infantry led the way, and by day's end both regiments had captured several enemy strong points and advanced more than 3 miles. 2 115th doughboys, Lieutenant Patrick Regan and PFC Henry Costin, as well as a 116th NCO, Sergeant Earl Gregory, earned the Medal of Honor for their actions. Pushed beyond its limits by the Allies' crushing offensives, the Central Powers agreed to an armistice and the guns finally fell silent in the War to End Wars on November 11, 1918. The Great War was over. A joyous citizenry, proud of the 29th Division's pivotal role in bringing about victory, welcomed the 29ers home. On February 3, 1941, 10 months before Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt called up the 29th Division's units from Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia for 1 year of active service. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, and America's entry into World War II would eventually extend that 1 year to nearly 5.
Well, I'm originally from Rhode Island. I was working at the shipyard in Quincy, Mass, for Bethlehem Steel Shipyard. We were working on heavy naval vessels. And finally, they put me in 1A, and I received my notice to report for induction in June. And actually, in first part of July, I was sent to Fort Devens, and that's where I was inducted.
The 29th Division sailed for England in September 1942 aboard the famous liners Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth.
On January 17th, I left the States and the Ile-de-France, and after zigzagging across in a very bad northeast storm, we came to Scotland. Didn't stop there, but just long enough to get on trains, and I was shipped down to Penzance and joined the 175th Infantry Regiment at St. Ives. But there we trained with the 175th for 5 months, and that's where I first joined the 29th Division.
The division began incessant training in central and southwest England, which would continue for 20 consecutive months. In July 1943, a new commanding general arrived who would instill a unique spirit within the 29th and carry it through to the end of the war. General Charles Gerhardt was a tough disciplinarian, and along with General Dutch Coda, transformed the division into one of the finest fighting outfits in the U.S. Army.
Well, in preparation, they had to be frightened to death. I mean, you know, they knew at that point in time there was no mystery of where they were going or what they were doing. They had seen the terrain models, they'd seen the maps, and they knew what was there. Even then, they had no real idea of how difficult the terrain was, the cliffs behind Omaha Beach. There was just no way of forecasting that. But being Stonewallers and being 29ers, I mean, they left with optimism. They were going to land on that beach. There'd be craters where they could hide in. They'd advance across that beach. They'd take the high ground, and they'd be moving toward inland very shortly. So they always had a very positive attitude. Down inside, they had to be frightened to death. But on the surface, they were cheering each other up, being very positive for what they were about to be a part of. And of course, at the end of the day, suffered tremendous, tremendous casualties across the board. But did what, if you stand there and look at it, is an unbelievable assault against unbelievable odds. It's just, you are amazed at how anyone could have actually survived that morning of D-Day.
The 29th Division played a leading role in the greatest military operation in American history, Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion of Normandy, France on June 6, 1944. Joining forces with the 1st Division, the 29th stormed ashore on Omaha Beach, led by the 116th Regimental Combat Team at 0630, and followed by the 115th Regimental Combat Team 4 hours later. The 29ers met fierce resistance, and despite crippling casualties in the 116th, the Americans penetrated the enemy defenses and established a tenuous beachhead beyond the bluffs.
We did land on we landed on D+1, and we were the reserve regiment. We did get an arrowhead for that, and actually it was a rough landing, and we went on up. There was sporadic firing. We saw the damages and the catastrophe that happened there on D-Day, and we went right up the top of the bluff.
The 116th Company A from Bedford, Virginia was effectively destroyed in the first few minutes of the landing at the Dog Green sector of Omaha Beach. 30 members of the company hailed from Bedford, a town of only 3,000 citizens. 20 of the Bedford boys lost their lives in the landings. But
they were a close group with sets of brothers, and the idea of going in there with your brother, where today we would never consider that. In those days, you know, it was not considered an issue. Brothers fought side by side, and unfortunately in many cases, in the case of the Bedford boys, brothers died right there together as they tried to advance across the beach. So it was a devastating blow to that small community of Bedford, Virginia, and a good reason that the D-Day Memorial exists there today to honor all of the D-Day landers, but specific to that town and the impact it had on Bedford, Virginia.
Inspired by the leadership and courage of Assistant Division Commander Dutch Coda, both the 116th and 115th gained the prestigious Presidential Unit Citation for gallantry and outstanding performance of duty on that momentous day. The 116th Infantry Sergeant Frank Perigori, already a recipient of the Soldier's Medal, also earned the 29th Division's first World War II Medal of Honor on June 8, 1944, 2 days after D-Day. A week later, Perigori was killed. Led by the dynamic General Gerhardt, the 29th pushed inland through the constrictive Norman hedgerows, which the Germans used skillfully to impede the American advance. During that ordeal, the 175th gained a Presidential Unit Citation for its epic stand against an enemy counterattack on Hill 108, forever known as Purple Heart Hill.
I was wounded on Hill 108, and that was a very tough day. Normally, you should have 39 men in a platoon. Well, after Hill 108, it was a very tough fight, and we took very heavy losses. When I talked to Bill Doyle after that campaign on Hill 108, Bill Doyle told me that on the 18th of June, when they were finally relieved, there were 7 men, Bill Doyle and 6 privates. I remember going through St. Lo as a wounded coming back. When we were told to take St. Lo, we made very good progress, and the progress was through the hedgerows, and there was no real tactic that we had. Tanks were no good. Nothing would help us, artillery. We just had the hedgerows we had to take. They were very thick, and the Germans would punch a hole in one end of the hedgerow, and it was a very great defensive position. And I know that every time that we took a field that was held by the Germans, we lost men.
The key city of St. Lo, a June 10th objective, was not liberated until July 18th, following a 6-week slugfest that cost the 29th a staggering total of 7,500 casualties. The highly esteemed Major Thomas Howey of the 116th gave his life on the next to last day of that epic struggle and became known in the stateside press as the Major of St. Lo.
The battle for San Lo was the bloodiest in the history of the 29th. The boys we had to leave behind were praised by our division commander, General Charles Gerhardt. He didn't mention that we all had earned the Croix de Guerre from the French.
After a short rest, the 29th resumed its offensive and pushed further south toward the city of Vire, liberating it on August 6th. The 29th drove the enemy into the shrinking Falaise pocket before pulling out of the line on August 14th. The first phase of the liberation of Western Europe was complete. Following Allied victory in Normandy, hopes for a speedy end to the war soared. As the Allies raced across France toward Germany, the 29th Division headed in the opposite direction to the western tip of Brittany.
Our new date was with the port town of Brest, and the wise boys were saying Jerry was on his last legs. It was only a question of days and he'd be tossing in the towel. They said.
And we were assigned the mission of capturing Brest. So we were trucked to the area of Brest and Brittany, and there we had a different kind of a war. There was forts, and there were hills, and some were man-made hills, very heavy artillery, and it was there that on the 14th of September, I was hit by an artillery shell explosion.
There, the 29ers fought a brutal 3-week campaign to capture Brest, a vital objective whose massive harbor Eisenhower hoped would solve the Allies' mounting supply difficulties. Sergeant Sherwood Holman of the 175th earned the Medal of Honor shortly before the fall of the city in mid-September 1944. Ironically, the Germans destroyed the port so thoroughly that the Allies never used it.
Nothing was left alive in that skeleton city on that warm September day. The port of Brest lay dead before our eyes.
The 29th re-entered the line near Aachen, Germany in early October. As the weather turned colder, the 29ers experienced 7 frustrating weeks of stagnant warfare, gaining little ground against a stubborn enemy. In November, the 29th Division commenced an offensive that it hoped would carry it to the Rhine River. But after 3 weeks of deadly combat, the 29th fell short of its goal.
We holed in from December to February, staring at Jülich from the west bank of the Rohr River. February 23rd was the date we left to give the Krauts their Rohr cleaning.
We stayed behind the Rohr River, we trained, and finally it came our turn to go over. Now, in the battle for Jülich, we made it over that bridge, and we did capture Jülich. I will tell you a little story there. Probably haven't told many people. I got my second Bronze Star there. We were going to attack to capture the fort in Jülich. And on that day, the company was supposed to move out. And when it came time for moving out, the lieutenant was nowhere around. I was a staff sergeant, so I had to make a move. So I just took my platoon, and because they were getting fire from a hill on the left, so I took the platoon. We went and captured that hill, captured those, killed and captured about 10 or 15 of the Germans. They were putting fire on our troop, and we were holding up the attack. And I guess that was the time that I got a Bronze Star for that mission.
The 29th crossed the mighty Rhine on March 31st, later resuming its attack on April 20th, reaching the Elbe River and meeting the Red Army advancing from the opposite direction on May 2nd. Nazi Germany surrendered 6 days later, and the 29th moved northward to perform occupation duty in Bremen.
The war was over. We packed up our medals and our victory. And we put aside our guns and took up prayer books.
I can't remember all my emotions, but it was a great relief because regardless of what, you see the stories, the movies, Hollywood heroes, all that kind of stuff, that was not a thing that the average GI did. I can remember my feeling was always, I just would like to get home as close to one piece as I could. That was my goal, and I made it.
So ended the 29th Division's role in the greatest cataclysm in world history. Nearly 4,000 29ers had given their lives, and an additional 24,000 were wounded or injured to save civilization from what Winston Churchill called the abyss of a new dark age.
When I go to France, I always make it a point to go to American Cemetery at Colville and St. James. And when I go there and I see those 8,000 plus at Colville and 6,000 at St. James, that's only a part of what was there. And you see all those guys, 18, 19-year-old, all the divisions, all the ranks. I feel so humble because those are the guys, they're the real heroes. It's not the Silver Stars or the Medal of Honor. Those are the heroes. And if you look there, you'll see them, their replacements, their sergeants, very many non-coms. Those are the heroes that I respect. They're the ones that made it possible for me to go home. And as I tell people, they are the ones that made it possible for all of us, for the great life we had all these years.
Following World War II, the reconfigured 29th Division consisted entirely of Maryland and Virginia National Guard units. Although several Guard divisions were called into active service for the Korean War, the 29th was not mobilized. In early 1968, a shocking decision seemingly brought the 29th's proud 51-year history to an end when the division was deactivated and its components shifted elsewhere. In 1985, thanks to Army Secretary John Marsh, a former 29er, the 29th was reactivated as a lean 10,000-man light division, one of 5 light divisions in the U.S. Army. Maryland and Virginia Guardsmen undertook vigorous light fighter training, emphasizing low and medium intensity combat.
There was a lot of history there, and it was great to see it come back as an active organization and be given the equipment and the soldiering that it needed to serve its country as it had in the past.
The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 signaled the end of the Cold War, triggering a profound change in Army doctrine. As the U.S. Army downsized in the 1990s, several 29th Division units mobilized for peacekeeping tours of duty in Bosnia and the Sinai.
September of 2001 was unbelievable period of time because the 29th Division had been selected to become Stabilization Force 6 and deployed to Bosnia. So the division commander and all of the division leadership left Fort Belvoir on Sunday the 9th, and I'll never forget General Blum turned to me and saying, well, you've got the ball till we get back. And at that time I was just a colonel, and I said, you know, I'm a little uncomfortable with this. And General Blum said, well, not to worry, what could possibly happen in 6 months while we're gone?
That mission had just begun when the September 11, 2001 al-Qaeda terrorist attacks triggered what the U.S. Army Chief of Staff defined as a long war for the very survival of our way of life. Stationed at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, 29th Infantry Division headquarters evolved into a small, flexible command team, lacking organic combat elements but capable of swiftly deploying overseas and taking command of any units assigned to it.
The response of the 29th Division was absolutely amazing. With a lot of the senior leaders gone, the soldiers volunteered faster than we could get them on active duty to serve in any number of different positions, from not only the airports, but nuclear power plants, post facilities, ports, bridges, tunnels. During that first period of after 9/11, the 29th Division was active throughout the East Coast, providing security and reassuring Americans that we were going to get beyond this and they could count on the National Guard and the 29th Division to be there for them.
For the first time in a generation, Maryland and Virginia National Guard units with historic ties to the 29th Division were called into federal service for year-long deployments. These included the 115th, 116th, and 175th Infantry, and the 110th and 111th Field Artillery, serving with distinction in active combat operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Others performed rotations in Kosovo, Sinai, Kuwait, and Guantanamo. In October of 2016, the entire 29th Division headquarters, under the command of General Blake Ortner, was activated and deployed to the Middle East for part of Operation Inherent Resolve, a large-scale campaign against the Islamic State.
Every military unit has done something important, and they continue to do something important. But the history of the 29th Division is the history of citizen soldiers.
29th Division, to me, was, we were trained, and we felt that, when I went through there, we felt we could do the job. We trained so hard in England. We were drilled there. My emotions, I don't know, and I can't really say, was I afraid? I don't know. Can't remember that. But I thought we could do it. So the 29th Division, we were a National Guard division. I don't think people thought that they could do what they did. But just remember, they went in Normandy, and they were there all the way till we met the Russians. And they showed that they could do the job.
Well, anytime I see the 29th patch, I can't help but the history part of me come out, and I see the blending of two magnificent organizations into one that is still recognized throughout the Army as one of the very best military units that's ever been put together. It's amazing that There are that many young men and women that are willing to put on a uniform and go in harm's way as their forefathers have, and I'm just so pleased to see that patch still out there and actively serving.
You know, I guess one of the things I was always proud of is I talked about that 29th Division shoulder patch that was handed to me by a man who went ashore on D-Day. When I put that shoulder sleeve insignia on my right shoulder on my dress uniform, it was that patch that I had carried in my pocket for 18 months. And I still have that patch. It's not on a uniform any day. It's in a frame today, but I still have that patch, and you just, those are the things that you just, it's hard to describe. I'm not sure you can put into words how that feels and how that ties you. You know, like I tell, you know, soldiers who wear a shoulder patch either on your left shoulder or your right shoulder. When I go through an airport or I go somewhere and I see a veteran with a 29th Division baseball hat on, I have an instant bond with that soldier. We may not have ever served together, but we served together. How can you not just feel honored and in awe when you look at that patch and you look at that blue and gray and just know where we came from and where we're going to go? I mean, the 20th Division's in harm's way right now, and they continue that lineage today.